Hi everyone, welcome back to the Frugal Kitchen. Today I'm making a vegetarian shepherd's pie, and the only reason this isn't vegan is because I used Greek yogurt with the mashed potatoes. And if you have a milk substitute that works for mashed potatoes, go ahead and use that. And that is the only substitute you'll need to make this vegan. So I don't know where this recipe came from. I found it before I started the channel, and so I never saved the source information. And it did originally require 2 russet potatoes, but I looked into it because I was curious if sweet potatoes are a good option for shepherd's pie, and apparently it is. So I got 2 sweet potatoes instead, and the only reason I am switching this ingredient is because the sweet potatoes have a better glycemic index than regular white potatoes. There's more starch and carbs in those. So I'm going to chop these up into like 1 inch, I should almost want to say ish, 1 inch-ish, 1 inch type, like around approximately 1 inch size cubes. Peel them first, obviously, wash them, peel them, chop them up into small pieces, and then you're going to boil them just like you're making regular mashed potatoes. Apparently, it's exactly the same as making white mashed potatoes. So that is helpful. So do that first, and then we'll start off on the veggies. Quick shot of sweet potatoes boiling, and it looks like I'm setting the timer for about 15 minutes after the boil starts to make sure they're soft enough. Now I'm taking 2 cloves of garlic and I'll be mincing that. Also, if you have an onion, or if you have a whole onion, go ahead and chop that up, dice that. I have half an onion in the recipe. I had already diced one up and had it in the freezer, so you'll see me add that later. But if you're using a fresh whole onion, go ahead and dice up half of a white onion at this point. This recipe is a really good one that I don't make a lot because I find that I tend to gravitate toward rice and pasta dishes, and that's because it's pretty cheap, and I really love rice and pasta. But I think this recipe probably cost me about $7 or $8 out of pocket. There's obviously things in here that would cost more if you needed to buy everything fresh, but things like the flour and some of the vegetables I already had on hand. So you'll get a pound of white mushrooms, and it says quarter them. I started slicing them into 4 slices because they were quite big mushrooms. And I think when I wrote quarter them in the recipe, I meant slice them in like a cross. I might have been using smaller mushrooms as well when I wrote that up. So just chop them up into pieces that are easy for you to fit on a fork, really. It's not that complicated. So I pulled out a little piece of sweet potato to see if it was soft enough, and it was. I kind of smushed it with my fingers. I wasn't going to eat it because it was really hot, and it was. So I was like, woohoo, it's just about done. So I'm going to finish chopping up the mushrooms, and then we'll move on to the other ingredients. So once your potatoes are all soft and cooked, drain out the water, and while it's still hot, add in your butter substitute. My recipe says 3 tablespoons of butter. This is vegan margarine, so I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of that. And then it says half a cup of Greek yogurt, which I do eat, so I'm not worried. I'm not vegan, but I like to eat vegan because of the cholesterol. This has fairly low cholesterol, though. So if you're eating vegan because of cholesterol issues and not because of environmental or animal cruelty issues, then you are welcome to try the Greek yogurt. It was good. Sour cream is a very good substitute for Greek yogurt as well. And I think, honestly, when you make mashed potatoes, you mash it up. So yeah, mash that stuff up before you put in butter and the yogurt. You mash it up and you add milk and butter and salt, and that's mashed potatoes. And I think I've never had vegan mashed potatoes, as far as I know, but I know that there are a lot of milk substitutes that work fine. Like almond milk would probably be perfect for this. So you can make this vegan with easily. I think the recipe might have called for something else, and I probably made it say Greek yogurt because um, I was buying that a lot of the time that I made this. So basically, I find recipes and then I save them as a Word document when I decide I like them and I wanted to make them more and more and more. So that's why I don't have the original source of the original recipe. So then throw in your butter or your butter substitute while that's still hot and mix it around so that it melts really well. And then you'll add all the yogurt or milk and mix that as well. If you're doing real milk, or I shouldn't say real milk, but if you're doing something liquid instead of this goopy yogurt consistency, you might want to just not put a whole half cup in right away. I would say add a little bit until you get the consistency that you want. Maybe a half cup is too liquidy. So be careful if you're doing that substitute. My recipe doesn't say this, but I decided to add some salt and pepper to taste at this point because I typically will add this to mashed potatoes if I'm making it as a side, which I really haven't made in a long time because to me, a side is something you eat with a meat, like a meat cooked all on its own separately from the rest of the food, rather than like a casserole or whatever, which is usually what I make. And I haven't made meat and like a meat and two sides in a really long time. Because it was just too high in cholesterol, so I stopped for the most part. So now you'll take 2 carrots, they're freshly washed, peel them, slice them up into little discs. You can slice them however you want, honestly. I just chose discs because I wanted something that was going to easily fit on a fork if I shoveled instead of stabbed my food, because that's typically how I eat something like this. Now take a big old skillet, and if it's not nonstick, maybe even if it is, spray some oil on it, some cooking spray. Add the onions that I mentioned earlier. These were pre-cut because I had an onion that I was afraid was going to go bad before I used it all up. So I froze this, and now it's ready for cooking. So add the onion and the garlic, and I know that I put the mushrooms and the garlic in the same bowl, and subsequently have a much too small bowl for what I needed. But the recipe does say to dice the onion, mince the garlic, and add them. Well, actually, it does say add the carrots and the mushrooms at the same time. But I would add the onions and the garlic first, and then the mushrooms and the carrots after that. Because I think the onions might need a little longer to cook, and that just could be my personal preference. I also added a lot of oil spray to this periodically, because I was afraid of stuff sticking to the pan. So that's the mushrooms and the garlic coming in, and I'll have the carrots a little bit later once the mushrooms have appeared to mostly be fully cooked. If you're finding your vegetables are sticking to the pan a lot, stirring will help, and so will keeping it on a lower heat. You might also, if the oil's not helping, add a little bit of water to the pan. Sometimes that, especially with mushrooms, can help keep things from sticking. Mushrooms are weird. They kind of stick to the pan no matter what sometimes. If you've never had shepherd's pie before and would like to make it the traditional way instead of a vegetarian way, the mushrooms are replacing ground beef, in case you didn't know, or traditionally lamb, but that's not super common and easy to acquire in the U.S. So I've let I've covered it to keep the steam in because I think that helps mushrooms, and I've tried, and you'll see that a lot. I'll cover it periodically and spray and stir until the mushrooms look like they're done. I first had this back in college when I knew an Irish guy, like from Ireland. He made this for me the traditional way, maybe with ground beef instead of lamb, but it was good. And so I don't know why I never really bothered making it until I started having high cholesterol, but here we are. So I added the carrots, and I'll let that cook a bit. Carrots don't take that much time to cook, which is why I added them after the mushrooms, because the mushrooms still, I don't think they're very fully cooked yet. So now the recipe says to add a teaspoon of thyme, and that's almost all of our thyme. I'm adding salt and pepper as well. To taste, no measurements on that. Now we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour, and this is going to help the tomato paste stick to the vegetables. I believe it also helps the gravy that the tomato paste makes when it's in the oven into a slightly, it wasn't really that thick, but a slightly thicker, not completely translucent concoction. And then we'll be adding 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. That's only like a fourth of a can of tomato paste. It's a 6-ounce can, so I'm going to freeze the rest of it. And I think there's another recipe I have saved for something that you make with tomato paste. But if I can't find anything, I'll probably just throw pizza, like make a crappy pizza out of like crackers or something, like basic. So now stir it all up really well. Make sure the tomato paste gets on pretty much all the vegetables. It's sticking to the spoon there, but I found a solution for that. Tomato paste is thicker than tomato sauce. I think if that's all you have, go ahead and try it because it's not like it's thick when it's finished being cooked. You may want to have like less tomato sauce, like maybe only 1 tablespoon, if that's the only thing you have, or ketchup too also might work in this case. So just stir it up. The flour, like I said, will help the tomato paste kind of stick to the ingredients. You won't really be able to tell that it's on everything. I think it was most visible on the mushrooms. So now we're supposed to add 1 1/4 cup of vegetable broth, which I am going to make using my chicken bouillon homemade powder. The chicken bouillon acts as chicken broth or vegetable broth. I use it on a lot of stuff because I got a little bit lazy in like reserving my vegetable broth that I was making from scratch using like scrap vegetables. If you don't have that stuff, water by itself is fine. The bouillon kind of just adds flavor. And then it calls for a cup of frozen peas, and I don't know if that's a cup because that's all I had left, but that's fine. So mix all that stuff up, and you're pretty much done. The gravy that you're seeing there will get a little bit thick once it's in the oven. And I mentioned that this cost me about $7 or $8 out of pocket. I have not looked at my receipts, but I could check Walmart.com right now to give a better idea. When I say out of pocket, I mean that I only bought a few ingredients because most of this other stuff was already in my house. The things that I had bought were the 2 carrots, very cheap, the 1 pound of mushrooms, the tomato paste, and the yams. And I think that's everything. So that's 4 ingredients to make this, which I think that's pretty damn good. So get a 9x13 pan, spray some nonstick spray on the bottom, and then spoon out everything from the skillet and spread it out pretty evenly. Now you're going to throw the potatoes on top. I maybe should have gotten a third sweet potato because the recipe does say to cover the potatoes with everything. And I don't know if 2 large russet potatoes are bigger than 2 sweet potatoes. I don't think they really are. But I didn't have like enough. It's also very hard to spread because the vegetables aren't a solid thing. They're moving around when you're spreading the sweet potatoes on. So cover all the vegetables if you can. Bake it at 400 for 25 to 30 minutes. I misread my recipe and thought it said 20 to 25 minutes, which is why I did 23, but that did not affect it negatively at all. If you're enjoying the recipe, please like, share, and subscribe to help us reach more people and so you don't miss any amazing recipes. So now you're supposed to broil it. I turned my broiler on high and left it in for, the recipe says, 2 to 3 minutes until the potatoes begin to turn golden, which is hard to tell for mashed like sweet potatoes. But they kind of got a little bit brown on top. I don't know if the broiling thing is all that necessary if you have an oven that's not super friendly to broiling. Then it says let it cool for 10 minutes before you start eating it, which I appreciate having that in my recipe because sometimes I'm impatient, but I also get a burnt mouth really easily. This turned out very well with the sweet potatoes. I have never had it like this before, and I honestly don't see any reason why I wouldn't just continue doing it this way. The gravy stuff that the tomatoes and tomato paste and flour made was great. I did add some extra seasoning on top because I don't know, all I had in here was thyme, salt, and pepper, so that's not enough for me. But I hope you enjoyed the recipe. Like, share, and subscribe, and happy eating, everyone.